Our churches are great at teaching biblical truth, usually, but sometimes I wonder if we do as well at equipping people for the work of the ministry. That is the topic of today's show. Welcome to Run with Horses. My name is Norman, joined by my wonderful wife, Susan, and our goal is to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus. The spiritual life is simple in many ways, but is potentially the most difficult part of your life. God invites you to grow, to live intentionally, and to join Him on His mission. I think it's very cool that we get to do that together. So thank you for joining me today. If you're new here, you can check out past shows wherever you listen to podcasts, or more specifically at runwithhorses.net. And as always, I do appreciate your feedback, any questions you have, and definitely leave a review wherever you listen. If you listen on the radio station, contact them and tell them thank you for carrying the Run with Horses show. Now on with the show.
Hello, I'm Susan. Welcome to the section for Christian caregivers. It has been a week. I apologize to some of you caregivers who have so much on your plate, carrying day and night for very difficult needs. I am not in that place right now, and my burden in comparison is very small, but it's draining. So my husband and I, sometimes our adult kids, live with my mom, so there's that constant responsibility of her care underlying all that we do. Some weeks are kind of low-key, not so much drama or emergencies, but then there are days like today, or this week actually, that Mom was bumping up against new limiting factors in her life. Things she used to be able to do effortlessly are becoming more and more of a challenge. Recently, it was trying to play on her ukulele in front of a group, and she's just going back and forth. What should I wear? Is this a good song? Oh, this is too high for me. I can't sing it. I can't read the writing. Let's enlarge it, which means 3 pages spread out 3 feet long. And if a couple of songs are sung right before she sings, she might forget the tune of her song. She gets jumbled up, singing 5 verses of a 4-verse song, and it's just difficult. And I feel bad for her because she loves singing and being up in front leading, but little by little her ability to keep up and do these things easily is fading. And I find myself growing impatient and rather grumpy with my mom. She gets more nervous in front of people, and does she really need to face this stress? So sometimes I say, maybe this is too much for you. But then maybe I'm just pushing all this away because it's too much for me to deal with. It's probably better for her to be a little stressed than just sitting in her chair and sleeping all day. So as I look at the process, it looks easy for me to just pick out a song, practice it, and sing. But it doesn't always go that easily. And then there's other things. The ukulele string breaks, or, we can't figure out what order to sing. But have you ever felt like you're the one that's going crazy? I'm figuring out that I need to be working on my patience, but I also need to learn how to smile. For some reason, as I help with music or trying to change her password on her computer or get her to the right page on Facebook, my voice starts coming out grumpy sounding, and I'm acting kind of angry. I'm not necessarily angry, but when I'm trying to help her see reason or figure out her reasoning, my sentences somehow become short and cranky. I don't really mind helping her with these little tasks, but all of this stress and uncertainty just kind of grinds me down. And it ended up that I can help fix something, and then I escape to my room upstairs because I need frequent breaks from her demands and very specific preferences that require more than I want to provide. One of my children overheard her telling someone on the phone how my family is always upstairs. They never spend time with me. And it's not totally true, but we do have to get away sometimes just to maintain our sanity. And I guess what we have to figure out is what our limitations are too. And it's one thing to provide her safety and be here available to her and think that that's enough, whether she believes that or maybe even if I can remember that. But it reminds me of the veteran caregiver I heard that said, I'm here to make sure my parent is healthy, not necessarily always happy. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And sometimes I don't feel like I do enough. And yet God has sustained me through this week, and I hope that my mom doesn't keep saying yes to too many things. But I have to also know that my actions affect those around me, and if I take on too much responsibility, it means I have less emotional strength to help those around me.
Today, we're thinking about teaching and equipping, educating and equipping. Maybe even we'll throw in some edification. How good are you with those definitions? Sounds sketchy. So, in my experience, particularly in our circles, and I realize this is probably true depending on someone's background, but in the circles that I've been in at least since college, I feel like the churches do really well at teaching the Bible. They go through it expository preaching verse by verse and really try to understand what the intent is, what was meant in the original audience, how they understood it, what the original writer intended to say, and they really do a lot of research and study to understand what the text says. I feel like we do good at that. Would you agree?
Yeah.
I have been in a few churches where that's not the case, but not recently and not in our circles we're in now. But I was visiting a church not too long ago where I was a little shocked that this was not the case. And I'd heard of churches like this, but they read a Bible passage and then the pastor proceeded to tell a story. And it was somewhat sort of related, but he never went back to the passage. He didn't try to pull anything out of the passage. He did not refer to the passage again for the rest of the service. So if you're in a church like that, I am sorry. And I'm not sure you should stay. We do need to know what the Bible says. But in general, I think our churches do well at teaching. But today we're thinking about this idea of teaching, but that's not all that we have. We're to be equipped. As church leaders, we're to be equipping. I think that, comes from particularly most clearly in Ephesians 4, as you look at verses 11 and following, where it talks about these leaders are given to the church so that the church membership is equipped to do the work of the ministry. So there's clearly some definitions in there we would want to look at, equipping being one of them, which we're going to come back to. But the work of the ministry would be a big one. What's your understanding or definition of the work of the ministry?
Well, I suppose it would be the mission that Jesus gave to the church to fulfill.
Right. I think that would be a good starting point. We may want to, clarify it more when we are in the context of a church and say, practically, what do we do? Mm-hmm. But yes, how do we engage in the mission of Jesus? So you have to clarify, what is the mission of Jesus? And I've heard it put in many, many different ways, but basically his message was this message of reconciliation, that the kingdom of heaven is here, that the potential for being reconciled with God, for having your sin debt removed, that potential is now here. There is a doorway, and he is it. So we have this message of reconciliation. And to get that message to everyone is part of it. And then he also says, I will build my church. I think that's part of his mission, and he does use us to do that. In my thinking, at least, about how we consider the work of the ministry, we see this work of the ministry of reconciliation that Paul talks about in Corinthians, and how we're ambassadors. And you also have the work that Jesus is doing in building his church, and what he told us directly to do is to make disciples. I think those two go hand in hand. And somewhere in that mix, you have what it means to be doing the work of the ministry. So we have engaged in gospel ministry that leads this message of reconciliation. We also have the building up of people to be mature believers who are part of the church. And I think that's, as we make disciples, Jesus builds his church. That's how I would put it. So the work of the ministry is not primarily knowing things. I think that's one thing I want to make sure that we say today. It's great that we learn more about what the Bible says, but when Ephesians is talking about that we may be equipped to do the work of the ministry, it's not saying that we just know more. It's not passing a test. And I think sometimes you hear people talk in a way as if, you get the impression their whole goal is just to know more. Even recently I was talking to a pastor, and we're on the same page as far as our understanding that we should be disciple makers and training people to be disciple makers. He said he's had, particularly some of the older people in the church, said they really like a deeper Bible study. And he said, he looked at him and said, I don't know what you mean by that. We're looking at different passages, like this tells us to do this. There's not a deeper there. There's an obedience. Yeah, you don't need to understand it better. It's clear. Jesus said what he intended to say when he said, make disciples, when he said, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. There's not a hidden layer there. That's plain understanding of actions that you should take. So when we say, well, I want to study this deeper, it's not a deeper, it's just do what he said. And I think sometimes we miss that aspect. So how do you see teaching and equipping working together?
Well, there a lot of times needs to be some teaching to know what we're supposed to do, or maybe even how you're supposed to do it. But yeah, if you don't realize how you can actually practice it or incorporate that into your life, or what is the first step, or how can you motivate yourself, then you're going to fall short of the goal.
Yeah. So I do see it's not that you don't teach. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand me and say, I don't think she doesn't say we should learn the Bible. I'm not saying that. We should understand truth, what God said. We have to understand it to know what to do. So to some level, if we don't understand what God says, what Jesus said in his word, then we're not going to be able to be obedient. We're not going to be able to do it. So there's teaching what he said that we are to do. But then there's another level of teaching that moves more toward equipping, where it's, as a church, particularly as leadership in the church, teaching how to do that. So we can say, Jesus said we are to make disciples. I can teach you that that is true without ever equipping you to do it. So there's another layer of both teaching, what does it mean to make disciples? What is a disciple? How are they made? And then equipping is actually not just teaching you, here's the facts of how to do it, but now let me help you to be able to do it, to practice that. So they work hand in hand. And I'm afraid sometimes, though, that we've doubled down on teaching, and we study and we learn and we gain knowledge without putting it into practice. And I think there's a limit to what you can understand about the Bible without putting it into practice. So if you really want, if there was a deeper teaching, a deeper understanding, it would come as you're practicing what he said. I think that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking, I know even at the church that we're at now, like they're giving us a tool for how to disciple or do like a follow-up study with somebody and kind of going through all the lessons. But that's different than saying, let's do this together, or you do this with somebody and then bring your questions and then we'll work through that. I mean, it's one thing to say, here's a tool, but you still had no experience using it. So then there's still that little gap where either the person has to motivate themselves to just jump in and try it, which that's fine, or say, hey, come along with me and we'll do this together with somebody, and then halfway through let you be in the charge of it. And, it's just this. I was thinking too, we've used the illustration of reading a driving manual versus actually getting behind the wheel and driving a car for the first time. And it's similar with, any number of professions or occupations that to learn about something is one thing, but to actually be able to put an IV in somebody, you got to practice that, and it's not always pretty and might be painful to those around you, but it's in the doing and the making mistakes and getting back up and learning and having some counsel and teachers along the way can be so super helpful. And then by the end of the time, you can do it.
So what's the limitations then? Why do churches struggle to do that? So that example you're looking at, like our church, we're learning this material that is good follow-up material, but we're being taught the material. We're not actually doing it together. What's the limitation? Why can't we do that?
Well, I suppose you're looking at, it's too big of a group for one thing,
exactly.
And everybody has different hang-ups or hold-ups or questions. And
so again, I'll ask it, and I'm looking for a specific answer. I think it's clear, but so what's the limitation?
Probably not enough leaders.
Yeah, not enough people who have been discipled to do it. Mm-hmm. So you have one or two people who actually maybe have done this, mm-hmm. and then you have a group of, I'm not sure how many people are in the class, just to say 30 people who are there and want to learn how to do it, and they can't really, it's not the same doing it with 30 people as what they're actually being expected to do. So the limitation is the number of trainers, which is one reason why one of the conversations I think all of us should be having, whether it's pastor or any level of mature believer, you should always be discipling 1, 2, 3 people, whatever your capacity is. The pastor should have the greatest capacity. So really, a good way to have done this would have been for the pastor to disciple, to go through this with 2 or 3 or 4 other people. Take a small group, say 6 people, go through it with them so that they're all comfortable with the material and do it with him, and maybe even say, okay, now do it with somebody else that's that you know. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're going to break those 30, 40 people into groups, and you're going to teach them how to do it. And you're going to not teach them how to do it, you're going to do it with them. That would have been a more meaningful way to do it, but it's harder. It's a little bit slower, particularly in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But then you would have had more people equipped to do it. Like doing it in a class, you're still going to have a lot of people that are going to go, I'm not quite confident I can do that. But in doing it really with somebody, you're going to be much more confident because I've done this. And part of being able to do it that way, in a smaller group, you can say, hey, okay, we've gone through this and you've kind of seen me do it. Now I want you to do it. So you lead this class next time. Mm-hmm. And you're able to develop confidence that way that people can do it. But that's harder.
Right. Although it's interesting because I think there are people already in the church that could have, if he just, if the pastor or leader would say, hey, you 6 people, why don't we'll separate all the people that normally come and you just lead that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the other side of this. It's a different limitation, but it really comes down to be the same one. You need people who the current leadership entrust with that. Whether it's he trains them and entrusts them, or they're already mature enough and he just hasn't given them opportunities, they still have to be given that responsibility and accept it. And if you don't, we're stuck.
I think the limitation here, or one of them, is that you just have to have a vision for that. And if you don't even think, I just think it's not on people's radars that, hey, I don't need to be teaching this all 30 people. Yeah. I should be, divvying it up and just thinking how, it's just a total different worldview mindset type
It is.
thing.
It's a different vision of what the church is and how the church should work. And ultimately, disciple making is that. Like we have, and this is maybe a different topic, but we have, in general, most of our churches are very commonly called programmatic churches. We have programs to do things. We should do something with singles. Well, let's start a program for that. And our answer to everything is we'll need a program. So we have a youth program because we need to do something with youth. We have a singles program because we need to do something with singles. We have a young mothers program because we need to do something with young mothers. It doesn't matter what it is. Mm-hmm. We have a program for that. So that's kind of our approach. It's our default. And one reason we do that is because it takes fewer people prepared to lead. You can have a leader of a program, get a few volunteers, as long as the leader is capable, and one pastor can lead 3 or 4 of those programs, because some of them only happen once a month, some of them different nights of the week. So you have a paid staff can basically lead most of the programs of your church. There's no expectation or need for people to be discipled. Mm. The opposite approach, and the one that I'm a proponent of, is that we remove most of the programs. And we say very clearly to the church, you are our program. The people are the program. So there's some things, yes, I think a children's program is something that is going to work better. You need childcare while adults are doing things and different ways where a children's program makes sense. But a lot of the other ones, we need people equipped to invest in other people. And how do we do that? And people say, well, it takes a while to get that rolling. Well, it does. So not starting is not going to help us. We have to begin to invest in that and free up time for people. But that vision, that worldview is a big part of it. It's like, this is the way that the New Testament seemed to say the church should go forward. There weren't programs. There were people who were equipped to do the work of the ministry, and then they were freed to do that. I think that's a different look at the church. Mm-hmm. Which brings us back to this idea of teaching versus equipping, because teaching is very programmatic and easy to do in large groups. Disciple making, equipping, really requires a smaller group. And you can still do the teaching. That's the thing. Any size group, you can have one-on-one and you can teach the same things you teach in a big class. It is the equipping that can't happen in the big class. So there's some sizes of groups and relationships where it just doesn't happen. But you still need teaching. So teaching in general, there's a good scriptural basis for teaching people what the Bible says, right? So teaching is, we can define it as imparting knowledge, or doctrine, or biblical truth. So all those are good. We want those things. 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17 is a passage we always look at. It's one of the ways that we justify a lot of our teaching. So all Scripture is given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete. If we stop it there, it's all teaching. Thoroughly furnished for every good work. I think sometimes we stop short of that. So we say, well, we need to know the Bible backwards and forwards because it's valuable for all these things, but it's to equip us for the work of the ministry. I think that's got to be part of our teaching. So it's never, I want to teach you this so that you know more. That's never part of the way the Bible talks about knowledge or wisdom. It's meant to change us or transform us.
Yeah. I think the teaching is just so much easier because it's just, stuff that you can research and you can put together on a page and follow an outline and pass that on to somebody else. But I know I've had to prepare some speeches and stuff. And so, that part is easy. But then whenever I got to the end, like, oh yeah, we're supposed to say, like, how can you do that? And then that's usually, oh, I ran out of time. Sorry, bye. And then the people are just like, oh. And I know I've felt like that at the end of a sermon too. Like, yes, you've just told me how I really need to do this. And then you go away going, but how? Oh, you only gave me 2 sentences for that. But I think that's a different kind of mindset too, like thinking through, how does this apply to you, and how should this change my everyday life, or how can I put this into practice?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the things we don't think about enough as leaders in the church. Where are we asking those questions or having that conversation? So you have the biblical message, here's the doctrine, here's the truth the Bible says. Have a great message, and say you have 45 minutes for your message, and 43 of those are on the truth, and then you have 2 minutes at the end where you kind of throw out an idea of application. That's not quite sufficient for most people. There are people where it is, and it's one reason why we don't feel the pressure to really change. If it didn't work for anybody, there would be pressure to change. But my estimation of kind of what I've read, other people's estimation as well, maybe around 10% of the people are able to take the truth, look at their life, and see how it applies and do it.
Then they tell the pastor, hey, good job. This has just really changed
I'm making
me.
These changes. Yeah. And the pastor's like, great, I did a great job.
Yeah.
But those people are also the ones that could have read it themselves, and they didn't actually need the sermon. They could have read that and thought through it and come away with the same thing. It's I'm a little bit like that. So when I go to a conference or something and they're talking about a book, I'm very frustrated. If everything they say is in the book, I can do it faster. You give me the book and I have a little more information and I can run with that. I don't need you to tell me what's in the book. Some people do. They need to have that. But they're about 10% that they're going to run with it. It's the other 90% who that's not quite enough. For some of them, it's maybe just a little bit more, a little conversation, a little bit more information about what it looks like to practically live that out. For some, it's a lot more. I would say for the biggest, maybe half, needs some amount of personal conversation and walking together to live it out. And we just don't a programmatic church is busy, and you don't often have those conversations. Not that you couldn't, but it's just not high on our radar. The one way that I've seen some churches do this recently that I do like, they have their sermon, and then the next gathering of the church, whether it's a Sunday night or a Wednesday, or some of them do it right after the morning service, they have a time when they meet in small groups, and they actually talk about, for the next hour, the message. And here's the truth. First, there's several questions. Do you really understand it? Do you have any questions about that? And then, okay, now how do we live that out? How should we be different? I think that's really, really helpful. And that, if someone only needs conversation, that's going to really get them going. There still are people where, when you talk about certain things, they need to live it with you. And that is still another step past just talking about it. But those follow-up things, whether it's that extra time in conversation or living it out together, are where the equipping takes place. It's not primarily as you're just teaching the content.
It just really reminds me of parenting too, because, you're teaching your kids Bible stories, you're teaching them this and that, but then as you're living life together, you can say, oh, we just learned about, Moses, who had to rely on God for whatever. And then you see your kid facing something that sort of relates to that. And you say, hey, remember how we studied that? This is what we're talking about. And you put the theoretical into the actual life, happening. And you're just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And then you can correct or, however you want to do that. But the living life together and taking that teaching and incorporating that into your daily life, that's part of that too. It just reminds me of that.
Yeah, and that's the ideal. And I think that's the ideal in the church. It's just, as we have, say, have a church of 100 people, how do 100 people have that on a daily basis or weekly basis? In a programmatic church, it's just almost impossible. That is where the churches that have community groups or small groups where they're really strong and people are really have invested in those relationships, they have people like that. Somebody has hiccups in their work and they have somebody to call and talk about it, and they're able to say, hey, you remember that we were talking about? Exactly what you're talking about with children. You can have that, but not if you don't have the relational depth to have those conversations. So we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and continue looking at teaching and equipping and how we can do it better. I think we think about it being the pastor's job, but really it's all of our role to be edifying, building up, and equipping each other. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Before we get started thinking about some practical thoughts about equipping, I want to look at a couple of comparisons. Like if you teach without equipping, there's the real danger to do what we've mentioned before, is like creating knowledgeable but passive Christians. You get people who are very proud of what they know, but they're not actively engaged in the mission of Jesus. 1 Corinthians 8:1 says, knowledge puffs up, but love edifies. And I think equipping people, disciple making, requires loving people enough to invest in their life, and you kind of get your hands dirty. And that's not always easy, but I think it's always worth it. Then we have the opposite. What if you equip without teaching? What would you say that you have?
Danger.
Yeah, danger. What kind of?
Well, the blind leading the blind.
Yeah. And one way to put it was you have a lot of activity, but no spiritual depth to it.
No direction.
No direction, no discernment. So you just, lots of activity. And, you hear of churches that there's always things going on. Like there are people at the church, there's game nights and all these things. There's lots of activity, but people aren't growing. They're not being taught.
Or you could even do things like soup kitchens and, good things that are active, but there's maybe no...
Yeah, a lot of social gospel comes from this activity without truth or without truth guiding the activity. So Hosea 4:6 says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So definitely knowledge is important. Right. We're not saying that, so don't go away with that. So really what we're looking at is the balance of teaching and then expecting our obedience to walk along, our actions to follow along with our teaching. So a mature, healthy church will be discipling people, and here's the truth, here's what God has to say, and now let's put it into practice. What does that look like? And I keep coming back to a lot of the churches I've grown up thinking about it and being involved in it. There's a lot of truth, but I wasn't really challenged to put it into practice in a healthy way. So what happens? We have a lot of just kind of continuing to do the same things because we're not asking good questions. One of the things about continuing to learn what the Bible teaches is that we're challenged to look at, here's the truth of God's Word, and here's who I am and what I'm doing, and here's our church. Do they match? Does who we are and does who the church is match what God says? And we always should be comparing back to that. And if we say, yeah, I'm not quite sure that's where we are, well, who needs to change? Well, the Bible's not going to change. It should be us. So that always learning truth and always intending to live that out keeps us honest in our activities, I think.
And as the culture changes or new things, new problems arise, we have to say, all right, what does the Bible say about this new thing?
Yeah. It's one of the verses I love is Hebrews 5:14, it talks about solid food belongs to those who are full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And I think that principle there of putting into practice what we know, using the truth that we know, helps us then to discern good and evil, but also to discern our activity. Is this activity profitable? Is it achieving what we hope to achieve? Are we willing to change it? I think there's a danger of becoming attached to what we do right now and think, but we enjoy this. This is fun.
Right.
You know, someone came up with this and it was a good purpose and good reason. Well, it was, and maybe it served its purpose, and maybe we do want to continue it, but maybe we need to change it. But again, how do we know that? Well, we're looking at the truth and we're evaluating according to it. There's a role in the church of leadership and members. And I think that's true with teaching. It's also true with equipping. And I think the leader is should be equipped to teach and to train others, to equip other people. You know, Paul challenges Timothy, 1 Timothy 4:11 and 12, to command and teach these things. There's truth that needs to be lived out. And the leaders are the ones who should be the primary instigators to get us to look at what God said and change, to be willing to humbly submit to God's word. That is kind of why we have those leaders. So what's the member's responsibility? How would you put it?
To follow?
Yeah, yes, to follow, to move from just hearing it to be active participants, to actively engage with the truth. And I think sometimes we just listen and we feel like, well, I've done my role. I showed up and clapped and I gave some money, rather than saying that the truth should change me. So not just to be hearers, but to actively participate in the transformation that God's doing in our life, but also in our community and our church. I think the Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, this is really what it's talking about, where it says, consider one another, that's think about other people in our church, in order to stir up love and good works. So we're thinking about other people, we're thinking about the good works or the things that God has called us to, of making disciples and making sure that people are cared for and all these, the work of edification. It says, not forsaking the assembling ourselves together. So that those two are mutually exclusive. You cannot consider one another and stir one another up to love and good works and not get together. So it's required that we get together. And then to exhort one another. So that is the result of hearing the truth and trying to live it out. As you read through the New Testament, you come across the one another's and say, how do I do that? Not just to read it and go, well, that's interesting. Well,
yeah, I should do that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I wish more people did that. Well, how are you doing at that? And I find it really challenging. You look at a lot of those and realize the relational component of the one another's, it just requires such a close relationship to be in the position to do those things. I think that's where we often struggle with really equipping people, because it is another layer of relationship. It's not just, hey, here's a book, read this, or here's the truth, go have fun. So practical challenges, overemphasis on the knowledge education can produce spiritual spectators. It's not what we want to do. Overemphasis on activity can lead to burnout if somebody's just busy, and they're not really being refreshed in God's Word. And we have to intentionally integrate the two. Teach for a purpose. Serve based on the truth. So teaching informs, equipping transforms. It's a good way to, I've heard it mentioned recently. Equipping, the goal is to shape people. That's this work of transformation that Jesus is promised to do, to shape us into the image of Christ. Teaching is about what we know. Equipping is about who we are becoming. And the way I've put it in the past, particularly with a lot of our college students that we had visit us in Japan, is until you can be the right person, it's almost impossible to do the right thing. Where the question we often have is, what should I do? Well, the first question I think Jesus asks is, who are you? So, we, in healthy churches, we often ask, what's our identity? Who does Christ say we are, and how does that change our thinking and our actions? And it's that question. The truth tells us who God says that we are, how we became this person, and becoming that person, as Jesus transforms us, it should transform our thoughts, our actions, our conversations. If it doesn't, then like our shorthand, we say we'll become like Pharisees, we become hypocrites. So knowledge, the education is pretty easy to pass on, but that transformation, it really requires walking with people and struggling through the details and getting, in the mud with people, and that's just not easy.
But it's interesting because when you know a lot, you said that knowledge puffs up, but there's nothing like just trying a new skill like meeting with somebody and trying to share the gospel that just knocks you down off your own pedestal to say, wow, I really stink at this. And then you reach out for help and say, hey, I need a little more training, or how do I do this better? Or I said that, but I don't think that was the right answer. What should I have said? Mm-hmm. And it just motivates you. And if it doesn't send you to despair, it should motivate you to look for more answers and try to get better at whatever you're trying to do.
Right. And I still feel like a lot of things that I do, like I'll do something and feel like, wow, I just didn't do that very well. How could I accomplish the purpose better? Whether it's leading a Discovery Bible study or a workshop or even a conversation with somebody. There are times when I have a conversation like, well, I could have done that better. How did I missed a few important things. And I wasn't ready for that conversation. And to me, that points back to you have to be the right person. So how do I be the right person and be ready for every conversation? So that points to me needing to continue to grow. But there are also times where, whether it's a Discovery Bible study or a workshop, that I need some new skills. I had the information, but I wasn't able to communicate it effectively, or I didn't feel like I really said what I wanted to, or it wasn't understood the way I hoped it would be. And I think some of that is skill. That's I need to be better equipped to do some of those things. And so as a person who's trying to equip other people, that's part of my challenge is how do I equip someone else to do this? So I can tell them what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, but how do I equip them to do it well? And that's not always an easy question to answer. And sometimes they have to try and fail. And okay, well, that's a question that we didn't address, so let's address that now. Yeah. And then they try and fail a different way. Oh, okay, there's another question that we didn't address. Right. It's slow, but I think that's what equipping and disciple making is. It's investing in that slow, steady progress. So equipping practically requires application and practice. So we mentioned before in the first half of the show that we need to have that time of discussing and figuring out what is the application. But then we also often, many of us, need some time practicing that. So a good example would be like the Discovery Bible Study. I mentioned that already. If you want to lead one of those, I can give you a worksheet. It's like, oh, here's the steps. Just do this with somebody. And you probably can do it. And if you do it often enough, you will figure it out and you'll get better at it. But you'll do better if you have someone there with you and maybe co-lead and go back and forth, see them do it, and you get to do a section of it. And then you do it while they're there, and they can say, hey, you did great, but this part, it'll go a little smoother if you do this, or you forgot this part. You'll learn faster. It just makes that you're putting it into practice with a coach. And that's really a good way of looking at equipping.
Yeah, part of what I'm hearing too is that if you want to learn these new skills, you really have to be teachable and be willing to have feedback, even if it's negative or like, you need to work on this. It's not always easy to hear somebody else's, like, you need to change, buddy.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and hopefully the person equipping is not going to put it quite that way, but yes. I think anytime we set out to attempt things we haven't done before, it requires a lot of humility. But clearly that's something biblically we should desire. So if you're serious about developing that humility of Christ, I think one good way to do that is to try things that you're scared to try that you know would be good for you. Being willing to do it. I think some people have been asked to teach a Sunday school class and they're just, I could never do that. Well, it might not be pretty, but you could do it, and you probably could get good at it, but it might take a while. Some people take longer than others, and you might find out that you don't do well at it, you don't have that skill, and they'll have you do something else. But the willingness to try, I think, is important in a lot of things that we think about following in the footsteps of Jesus.
Well, and the more that you feel like you can't do it, maybe the more you will lean on God to help you to get through it and not just try to do it in your own gifts.
So a big part of equipping is looking at, if you're the equipper, is giving people opportunities. And I think that is one of the holdups for many of us, that we feel like we have a responsibility, and the responsibility is the task. And see, to me, that's where we've made a mistake. We feel like I've got to accomplish this task, and I can do it better than you can do it, so I'm just going to do it. I can do it faster, and it'll be done better. That's probably true a lot of the time. But it also means that you're always going to have to do it then. I've talked to some pastors and people in leadership, and they say, I don't have a lot of margin. I'm at capacity in everything that I'm doing. So who are you discipling to be able to do what you do? I don't have time to do that. Okay, well, by not discipling someone else to do what you're doing, you're saying, I'm always going to be where I'm at right now, at capacity with no margin. I'm going to have to do everything until I quit. That's not healthy, and I also think it's not biblical. Margin is created when we train someone else to do it and then give them that. And one of the pastors that I was talking to said, I get it. I understand what you're saying, but I just look at my schedule and go, I don't have time. It's like, well, you do have to stop doing something to make time for this. But ultimately, if everybody in your church is going to be shepherded well, you need more shepherds. If you equip more shepherds, you begin to free up more time to invest in coaching and mentoring more shepherds. And ultimately, you do have margin then. And the church is actually better cared for than when you were at capacity all the time. But that's a hard concept for us, because we feel like we feel good because we're needed, and we enjoy what we're doing a lot of times, and we just like being at capacity. But that's not best for us or the church. It's hard to give away ministry. So equipping will require us to give away ministry, to allow people to make mistakes, even when we need to take responsibility for it. I allow this person to do this. That's on me. I'll help clean it up. That it will happen, but that is how they grow. And it's a lot harder to do that than just lecturing. That's just the way that it is. We mentioned this before, but just to double down on it, equipping really requires this tremendous relational investment. And because in this way that I'm thinking about equipping here, it's disciple making. I'm helping someone intentionally follow after Jesus. It requires us to be invested in them. You can teach from a lectern at the front of a lecture hall and have 1,000 people hear you, and facts will be transferred. But equipping is much more personal, is much closer relationally, and requires some modeling. Equipping is going to happen best when somebody sees you doing it. And then you're able to have conversations about it, and they're able to do it, and you see them doing it, and you're able to have conversations about it. That means smaller numbers. It means closer relational distance.
I think, too, if you're just sitting in the audience and you're hearing even like an equipping type of message or information, it's different when you're in the group because you don't really necessarily think this is for me. I mean, it's like, yeah, somebody in this group needs to do that. But when you're sitting with somebody and saying, all right, now how can you do this? Then it's like, oh, well, this is me. I'm expecting this from me. So it's a different mindset.
Well, it's one thing, as a leader or someone who wants to be just a disciple maker, that's true and that's important to walk up to someone and look him in the face and say, hey, would you be interested in this? I think you could do this. I'd like to help you or walk with you. Or would you help me? Yeah. But have that conversation face to face. Because a lot of people that will hear the same invitation in a group of 40 people will go like, well, he's not talking to me. Right. But when you stand in front of them and say, hey, I think you could do this. This would be really cool for you. They're going to respond differently. And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable for them to say no, and that's also good. You're forced to wrestle with, do I really want to follow Jesus, or am I just giving lip service? And they're forced to make a decision that you're not forced to make in front of a group of 40 because, well, yeah, somebody else is going to do it. And I found that having those conversations, many more people respond than you think will. Those are the healthy conversations because we're saying, I think God has an opportunity for you to grow and to help other people to grow. And I really want to help you to be that person. And people respond to that. I know I've responded to that in my life, and I want to pass that on to as many people as I can.
Yeah, I suppose that's one way that the devil defeats a lot of us. Just before it ever gets started, you just look at people and think, well, I'd love to invest, but either your fear keeps you back or you think, oh, they're just going to say no, and you don't even try because of that. Or maybe you do extend the invitation, hey, would you like to help me do this? And they say, oh, this is not a good time. So then you just go, oh, see, it failed. So, and I'm not going to ask anybody else.
Yeah, and there are probably quite a few people who won't clear out enough margin to do things. But that is part of it. That's even then, I think it's a success to talk to them because they're forced to be confronted with, I'm too busy for what God's doing. And a lot of times it may not be instant, but they will begin to think about their choices and maybe clear up margin down the road. But if they're not confronted with it, they don't actually think, oh yeah, I'm doing everything I'm being asked to do. But there's more. And
you can learn how to ask or how to make it look attractive or, even just thinking what you said, like, hey, I need help. So the people that like to be helpful would respond to that, whereas somebody who doesn't care or doesn't have that kind of mind frame would respond to a different question a little better.
And the knowledge about how to ask somebody, again, comes from that relational component. So that's always important. Equipping challenges our comfort zones. It definitely does that for equipper, but also for the person you're equipping. It is very comfortable to sit in a class and have nobody really talking to you. You don't have to raise your hand and answer any questions. It's just very safe.
And boring. Sometimes.
Can be boring too. But because it's that comfortable place, we're not really challenged to grow. We don't really have to trust God. We're really hesitant to step into things. So equipping, it does challenge our comfort zones, both as the equipper who's like, well, I don't know, am I really going to be able to help this person? I'm not sure. And for the other person, am I really going to be able to do this? Do I really want to grow in that way? Because then I'm going to have more responsibility, or people expect things from me, or I'm going to have to stop doing things that I was doing, or there's all these things that make us uncomfortable. Those conversations, though, those pushes are healthy for us. So equipping is more difficult than teaching because it involves confronting those fears in ourselves, maybe apathy or internal resistance to growth, where we have things that we've been holding on to that, hey, to really be obedient here, I've got to let go of that. Mm-hmm. And some of that's just like hiding in the background. I have to let go of that and take responsibility. And a lot of people don't want to do that. It's going to be stressful. And I'm that way. It's stressful for me. I prefer not to, but if nobody else is, mm-hmm. you take steps to be the person God wants you to be. So equipping also takes a lot of patience and perseverance, where teaching can be quick. You can schedule a lecture or a classroom and show up, do your part, and leave. It's just quick. It's easy, and you're done. Wipe your hands. Mm-hmm. Equipping is much more involved long term. We mentioned before, it's like training a child. That's it's not something you can do in a day. You don't have your kid for a day and teach them and send them on their way.
Well, and each one is different. So you can't just teach everybody the same way because they don't assimilate that information the same way.
Right. Yeah, so just because you've raised one child successfully doesn't mean the second one's going to go exactly the same. That's it's one of the realities that people are different. And it's true for everybody that you disciple or try to equip. They have had different past experiences. They've had different training in other areas and secular paths, and they have different needs. Some need a lot of encouragement. Some need somebody to stand in their face and, hey, you're doing this wrong.
Or just the vision, hey, you could do that.
Right. So people are different. So equipping is slower, it's harder, and can give you more headaches.
But I think it's also more rewarding, too.
Definitely. That's the part we're coming to. It's definitely more rewarding. It's one thing for somebody they can pass the test. Mm-hmm. But like for us, we have 3 kids, and to see them doing things like, wow, it's just awesome to see them do ministry or to take really good, healthy steps in their life. So that's just really proud of them. It's the same thing when you have work to equip and disciple somebody and see them actually take steps to do it. Like that's so rewarding to see that. So was it hard to get there? Sure. But it's worth it in the end. I think that's part of what we need to understand. It is hard, but it is worth it.
Yeah.
So equipping, maybe the last thing that we'll mention, requires giving away a lot of your authority, particularly as a leader. If you're talking about equipping somebody to do something smaller, maybe there's not a lot of authority involved, but particularly at the level of the pastor and Sunday school teachers, people that have some kind of responsibility, equipping means giving away some of your authority so that someone else can take that responsibility. It's not controlling, it's not micromanaging. It's saying, this is ultimately about Jesus and about what he's doing, and I don't have to do everything. I'm glad to give away my authority and to back you so that other people will listen to you so that you can grow. Because ultimately it's about Jesus growing you to be more like him. And it can be difficult to do that. Teaching, you're not really giving away authority, you're giving facts. But the equipping, often you're giving a lot of yourself and you're identifying with this person in a different way. And that can be challenging because they may make mistakes, which may reflect poorly on you, where they were in a class. Well, yeah, they're in my class, but they didn't really get it. And you just move on. It's harder when you've invested and you're really connected with them. And many of us find that harder than teaching. So teaching is easier. Just focus on knowledge transfer. Equipping is harder because it demands a life-on-life investment. That patience, empowering, really walking with people, guiding them into that transforming action. Doing it is really where we really grasp who Jesus wants us to be. So are you focused more on teaching or equipping? How can you free up some time so you have margin? Those are good questions you need to ask. Thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed the show, you can listen to all the past shows wherever you listen to podcasts, or a good place to start, runwithhorses.net. You can also write me at norman@runwithhorses.net, or leave a comment on the Run With Horses podcast Facebook page. Don't be discouraged if it's difficult. It is totally worth it in the end. Don't give up. Don't stop. Keep your eyes on Jesus and keep running.
Caring for another human is a huge responsibility, and often we do it all by ourselves. I'd like to propose to you another way. How many Christian caregivers do you know? How wonderful would it be if you and some fellow Christian caregivers met even just once a month, online or in person, to go through the Bible book of Ruth? Before I became a caregiver, I had never considered that Ruth was a successful caregiver. But I have come up with a book called The Redeemed Caregiver to help share with others this journey. You can dig into Ruth in a new way, with room to jot down answers to specific questions, as well as times to share your experience and thoughts with others. Maybe you think, I can't start a Bible study, but this is an easy option for anyone to use. It's a time of sharing, and prayer requests and answered prayer can also be added, making it a huge encouragement to all involved. So look up The Redeemed Caregiver by Susan Jane Smith. You can look on Amazon.com, and my prayer is for Christian caregivers to meet together and share the journey.